Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you a very simple way of doing a mixed media layout. For those of you that have seen a few layouts and you think, oh, I'd like to have a go at that, but perhaps they're just got a few too many elements on and you can't work out the steps. This is just to give you a few little basics. Now quite often you will find that there's a little teeny tiny photo in the middle of all this mixed media stuff, and I'm going to try and avoid that with this simple way of doing a mixed media layout. The other beauty of this little layout that I'm going to show you is that you don't need very much paper at all. You need one piece of 12 by 12 and then lots of scraps. And I've decided to use good old Sport, which is by Graphic 45, and you can see here that I do keep hold of all my scraps, don't like to let them go as I really love the papers, and there's always something you can do with the prints that come on the back of some of the more fantastic sort of illustrated pages, and I'm going to be using some of these smaller prints like these here. So I'm going to be using some of the checks, and I'm going to keep my patterns as red, white and blue because that's what my two little chaps here are wearing on their running kit. So Callum and Ivan some years ago took part in a fun run, and Callum's 15 now, so you can see time has flown by a little bit, and I'm going to finally scrapbook these pages of the warm-up before they set off on their little mile fun run in aid of sport relief. So the first step with any layout is finding which photographs you're going to be scrapbooking, and I've got my two little photographs, and as I said, I've identified the colours in those photographs, and you will need to do the same. So I've gone with red, white and blue, and then it's a case of looking for small pieces of pattern paper. They don't have to be in one collection like mine are, but Graphic 45 make it easy. As you can see that I'm piling up on the right hand side lots of lovely prints, all with that red, white and blue theme, and they're going to work perfectly with my photographs. You only need teeny tiny scraps, which works out even better for me because I do love to make my Graphic 45 paper go a long way. And I think I might want to use this football strip. You'll see I don't actually use it in the end, so I'm feeling a bit bad now that I've cut into this piece of paper and I didn't need to, but I'll keep hold of those scraps and I'm sure that I'll be able to use them on something else. And the other thing that I've done is find myself a piece of 12 by 12 to work on. I suggest that you stick to a plane considering what we're going to be doing to the top of it, and I've gone with an off-white that matches the background of the papers that I'm using. Then you want to start cutting some strips, all different widths, nothing too wide. No, I don't think I've got anything wider than ½ an inch, and down to about 1/8 of an inch, which I'm chopping here. It doesn't really matter about the lengths because we're going to play with those as we put them onto the paper. So you just want to go through all those little patterns that you've collected and cut a few strips of each. Now, as I said, you don't really want too many photographs for doing this, otherwise you won't have any room to do any mixed media. So I've got two narrow photographs and I'm going to put them on my layout like this. So the trick is now to draw attention to the photographs that are going to be on your layout, but I really need to know where they're going to end up, but I'm not going to put them onto the layout till the end because we're going to be using inks and paints and things, and things get a little bit messy, so we don't want to spoil our photographs. So I suggest that you position your photographs on your layout and then draw around them lightly with a pencil. That way, once you remove your photographs, you will be able to see whereabouts your little photographs are going to be. Sorry, it's just flicking in and out for a moment. Keep my hands in shot, that will help. Whenever you get a piece of white paper or cream paper on the screen, the camera's not quite sure what to focus on. So we're going to make all of the paper strips on our page. Draw your eye into the photographs which are going to be the focal point on the layout. And I've decided to do a simple layout where everything goes across the middle of the page with just a little touch of interest in the top left and the bottom right hand corner. So I suggest you start just by arranging your strips in a random fashion around your page. So like I said, I'm going to concentrate on 3 areas. One is the area right across the middle of my layout, and that sort of runs underneath the 2 photographs that I'm going to position on the page. And then just to repeat the patterned strips and to just form another little focal point, I'm going to be grouping together a few little strips at the bottom right and the top left of the layout. So I think you can see roughly what I'm aiming for. So once you're happy with the kind of layout of your strips, you are going to remove them and start to lay down some ink first. So now I know the area that I'm working in. I've got some faded jeans distress ink and some fired brick distress ink, and I've also got a couple of background stamps. This one's by Tim Holtz, and then I've got a really ancient little group of stars that I think the company used to be called CD, I think, something like that, CD stamps. And I think it was a set that I got from QVC many moons ago. And the first thing that I'm going to do is just randomly stamp sections of this little, it's almost like a piece of ledger print. It's a border strip, and I'm just stamping in the areas where my paper strips are going to be running. So I'm just adding a few little pieces. Don't worry if you don't get them all down at first shot. You can always add some more stamping later, but it's just positioning a few roughly in the areas you know that you're going to be working. Now I've picked the ledger stamp because it has numbers which are in some of my pattern papers, and I've picked a star stamp again because I've got these little strips of stars also in my pattern papers. I'm just testing out two reds, so I've got barn door and I've got fired brick, and I'm going to go with the fired brick, which is slightly nearer the colour of my papers. And then I'm just going to stamp again randomly with this little stamp some stars just into the background before I start laying down those patterned papers. So once again, just to say that you're going to choose background stamps that coordinate with your papers if you can, and you're going to choose two colours of ink that also coordinate with the pattern papers that you are using. And again, you're just stamping in the area that you've already kind of designated for yourself when you laid out those little strips of paper. And then it's time to start adding those strips. Now it's always wise to try and get that first strip down straight if you're going for an across the page layout. And again, with your verticals, try and make sure that they are completely at 90 degrees to the edge of your paper. Now you're going to have lots of different lengths and widths of pattern papers, but rather than put great big gaps in between each of the strips, you're going to group some of them together. So although we're going to create several groups, we are going to have little groups of patterned strips of paper just around the area that we've already defined with the stamps. Now you'll see some of the papers I'm trimming with a point at the end, and you'll see a bit later on I just use a slightly diagonal line on some of the others. It's okay to layer one patterned strip right on top of the other, particularly if one is a lot narrower than the other. Other than that, you can just put them side by side or slightly overlap them. Now the trick is to keep looking at your layout to achieve balance. So you might start by laying down a few of one pattern and then move on to another, and each time you do a little group of strips, just take a moment to have a little look about where things are going, and you'll be able to tell as you look at it where you need perhaps a bit more of one colour in particular, the red or the blue, and or perhaps you've only used one or two of one particular pattern and you could do with a few more. Really, there is absolutely no right or wrong in any of this. It's just about creating a group of strips that direct the eye to your photographs once they are placed in position again on top of the paper strips. Now I could choose to do a slightly different layout by perhaps keeping my main line vertically on one side or the other of the page, so I could work down the left hand side or down the right hand side, and then perhaps just have a little bit of interest on the opposing side. Or I perhaps could work in a little bit of an L shape in the middle of the page, or down the left and bottom edge of the page. And you can see how all my little lines are sort of directing your eye back to those photographs now. You can see they start to make sense once you put your photographs in position. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of a red frame around my photographs again to bring that emphasis back to my photographs, which of course is what the layout is all about after all. Now the reason I've chosen to do just a fine frame of the red around my strip, I think the red stands out the most, which therefore will make my photographs stand out the most, but I am sticking to a fine frame because all the little elements that are mainly red on my layout are quite fine strips, and I don't want to overpower the photographs or unbalance the photographs by keeping a thick frame around my photographs. So I'm keeping them nice and fine, and the way that I'm achieving this, rather than with lots of measuring, is just to stick my photographs in position on a piece of paper and then trim out the remainder of the photograph. And you can see immediately it starts to pop from the background with that slight addition, or the addition of that slight red frame. It's actually quite an orangey red in this collection, and it does look a little bit orange on camera as I'm watching it here, but in daylight it does look a little bit more red. Now at any point, any of the steps that I'm showing you, you can come back and revisit. So, you know, if you put your photographs back onto your layout and you think, actually I've not got quite enough blue strips, which I'm adding a few here, or perhaps you've covered up your stamping and you want to add a bit more, you can do so. So always keep coming back, putting your photographs down and checking where you are and that you're creating something that's pleasing to the eye. So far we've got a little bit of inking and stamping, and we've got our paper strips in place. Now I want to add a little bit of dimension with some brads. So I'm just going through my collection. I didn't have enough red or blue brads, so I'm going to go with silver because I found these little silver running shoe charms. As well as brads, I'm going to use a few of these little banner die cut pieces. So again, I'm just picking the colours that go with the layout. So I've got some red, white and blue elements. Again, I'm just positioning them to draw the eye into the photograph. And anything I do in the middle strip, I try to repeat on the two little sections on the outside. So you can see my little pile of brads at the side of my layout, but before I start to put those down, I'm going to add a little bit more texture. You could use texture paste if you wanted to, but I'm sticking to ink, and I'm just rubbing a little bit of ink through my stencil, again just to create a little bit more interest in the areas around my paper strips. Now I'm not sure if it's the law, but I think if you make anything mixed media, it's always nice to have a little bit of splattering. Well, it's my law anyway. I do like to see a few little dots and splatters of ink or paint on the page. I'm going to be using my distress ink. I've squished it onto my acrylic block, and then I'm just adding water and adding just some tiny splatters. Again, I'm trying to direct them around the concentration of the paper, and I'm just flicking by tapping my paintbrush against another paintbrush. If you use a paintbrush, it stops you getting a sore finger by tapping the paintbrush on your finger. Once you're happy that you've got enough little red splatters, then it's time to come back in with some blue. So just adding a little bit of water to my faded jeans distress ink, and again just splattering about the page. Again, it just helps to group everything together, and it's quite nice to have some random splatters that escape the confines of the little areas that we've been deliberately grouping the elements of our page together. So at this point, all the sort of messy work is done. I'm being careful not to put my hand into my splatters, and I'm just gluing down my photographs, and I'm ready to start putting down the little brads that I've collected together. Now I've lost one of the little elements. I probably should rewind the film and see if I can see where it went. But never mind, I've got another one on my little strip of die cuts, and I'm just going to position that in this little group up here. Oh, maybe here. So what else could you use rather than brads? Let's just say this was a little bit more of a girly layout and I had girly colours going on in my paper strip. I could add flowers, I could add little sparkly gems, you could use dimensional paint to add some sort of pearl drops onto your page. But because this is definitely going to be a boy layout, I'm going to be using my brads just to add some texture into those paper strip areas. Now you could use a similar technique to this on a card, for instance. If this was a square card and everything was scaled down a little bit, you could have, instead of a photograph, your main element perhaps with your image, a stamped image or perhaps a happy birthday message, and you could lay out the card using little patterned strips of paper. Now I want my little running shoes to dangle off this brad in the corner of the photograph, and I'm adding my brads to my paper strips. So I've got some little silver brads and some larger silver brads. I'm just using a map pin to pierce through my scrapbook layout, and then I'm attaching little groups of 3 of the small silver brads. Also adding a couple of the larger brads which have got a little piece of the tartan patterned paper behind, which I've punched out with a 1/2 inch circle punch. I'm just deciding where those elements are going to go. I'm keeping them close to the photographs again because they will draw the eye in to the main focus of the layout. Now my string doesn't stand out enough that I want to attach the little running shoes with, so it's cotton string. I'm just going to take some Distress ink in the faded jeans, and I'm just going to colour my string. I'm just adding a little bit of water, and I'm not trying to sort of dye this completely. I'm quite happy with this being a little bit tie-dye, just so there's a little bit of colour that will make the string stand out against the cream background. So once the string gets a little bit damp, then I can add the ink with the ink pad to the string. And then I'm just adding some darker elements to the string by tapping the ink pad directly onto the string. So to create a cord from my little piece of tie-dyed string, I'm just going to create a loop by tying 2 ends of the string together, and then I'm going to keep hold of that end in one hand and just popping my finger through the loop created in the other end, and I'm going to twist my hand to spiral the string. So 2 little health and safety tips. 1, don't twizzle so much that you trap your finger in one end and cut off the circulation to your finger. Keep an eye on how tight your string is becoming. Also, don't pull the string too hard or twizzle the string too fast, because you could cut into your finger if you're not careful. If you're not comfortable doing it this way, you could just pop a pencil in and spin the pencil in order to create your cord. So what you're trying to do is create a series of twists or coils in your string, so that when you bring the 2 ends together, they naturally twist together and form a cord. So it's just a case of keep bringing the ends together, seeing how much tension you've got in your cord, and if it's loose, just carry on twizzling, and if it's nice and tight and even, you know you've done enough. So I'm bringing the 2 ends together now, and then just letting go of the cord, and I'm quite happy with that for my little charms. And now I just want to tie off both ends of the string. So first of all, tying a knot in the end where I brought the loop and the knot together. So just trimming off the knot to start with. Don't let go before you tie that knot. I'm going to poke the end through my little charm and then I'm going to tie it off. Now because of the size of the hole in the charm, it's quite tight, a tight fit, so I'm just poking it through with the end of my map pin, and then once I've got all the ends in place, then I'm going to tie that knot to secure the coil and to secure the little running shoe to the end of the cord. And also add a little bit of glue to that knot to make sure that it doesn't come undone. Just testing the length of the string before I tie the second knot, and then I'm just twizzling it once around the brad, letting them dangle from the photograph, and just adding a little bit of PVA glue. This glue dries clear and it will just serve to make sure that that little knot or those little knots don't come undone. Now I quite liked the little tartan circles that I put around the large silver brads, and I've decided to add a few more of those little circle elements onto my layout. And then gluing them into position. So I've got some little chipboard letters which say Fun Run, and I want to colour one word red and one word blue. So making sure my U's and N's are up the right way before I colour them, and then I'm literally just dabbing my chipboard letters with my ink pad. And this is a great way to colour chipboard because the chipboard is quite porous, therefore the ink sinks quite quickly into the little chipboard letters. I just keep pressing until I get the required depth of colour. Now if you wanted a slightly truer blue, you could paint your letters white first and then add the colour once the paint was dry, but because I quite like that sort of grey blue, which is very similar to the blue that's in the papers, I just want them to be slightly darker so they stand out a little bit more from their background, and I'm colouring half the letters blue and half the letters red. And then it was just a case of deciding where my title was going to go. I've got a few options. I could have put it here, I could have put it here and here, but I liked it at the bottom best, so I'm going to put it here. So I'm just gluing them into place. Be careful not to smudge your inky letters onto your lovely cream background, and do your best to get your letters in a straight line. You could use a ruler if you wanted to, but I'm going by eye. So I was thinking of adding some blue brads into the middle of those little circles that I added, but I didn't have enough, so I'm going to use some little enamel dots instead. Now, if you do hear any strange creaking in the background of my voiceover, it's just my husband upstairs getting changed. We've got rather creaky floors and he's just come in from work. I keep shouting at him to be quiet, but can't he see I'm still working? The next thing that I'm going to do is add some doodling, and that is my final element on my page. And I'm going to be using a navy blue pen in order to do this. I start out with it quite fine and I didn't like it. It wasn't standing out enough for me, so I switch pens and go a little bit darker. So I'm adding a little tiny bit of journaling to each of my photographs, along with a wiggly border, again designed to add emphasis to my photographs. So one's going to say warm up and one's going to say Callum and Daddy. Actually, I think the first pen that I used was starting to run out, so that didn't help. So I'm coming back in with a slightly different pen, and I'm just emphasising those two corners with a wiggly border. going to go over the border that I created originally around my first photograph. And then I'm going to repeat that around my second photograph. Adding the words Callum and Daddy. I'm almost making my letters part of my frame. Now you can always tell when I'm concentrating, my fringe appears in the bottom of the shot. And then I'm repeating that little corner border down at the bottom. And the doodling is entirely up to you. Just pick out a few elements to draw attention to. Then I thought I would add a couple of little hanging stars. I decided that I wasn't all that good at drawing stars, so I'm going with the tried and trusted triangle method, and it just gives a few more little elements on the page. I might do one more just down there next to my little star. Now the trick when you're doing mixed media is knowing when to stop, and I think I'm just about getting to that point here. I'm adding a little bit of red around those circles again for emphasis, and I'm just filling in those little stars. Just be careful if you've used a water brush or a water-based marker, because you will disturb the ink if you then start adding or filling in a shape with another water-based product. So I'm using blue instead of the red because the red was making the blue line run. I'm turning it slightly purple. And I think that's it. So it's always worth standing back and having a little look at your work before you declare it done. But don't forget, you could always come back and add something else if you feel that it wasn't quite finished. I hope I've made that look fairly easy by breaking it down into simple steps, and that you give it a go, because you're bound to have a few scraps in your paper collection, I'm sure. I'm sure that you can mix and match them to a couple of photographs in your photo stash, and this layout does not take very long at all. So just follow the steps and you will soon have a little mixed media layout of your very own. And I think by using this kind of technique with these photographs, I've captured some of the movement of the day. Although these photographs weren't actual action shots of my two little men doing their running, it does capture the mood of the day. And I really think by using those tiny prints from the Graphic 45 good old sport range, it really does lend itself to this technique, and it's a great way to use up your lovely paper scraps. Now you could, if you wanted to, frame the whole layout. I'm just going to show you there. I could do that if I wanted to put this on a fine border, but I quite like it as it is, so I'm not going to do that, but just thought I would show you that that's something else you could consider when you're making a little mixed media layout of your own. So I'm hoping that I've persuaded you to give this look a try. If you've been looking at all those mixed media layouts and you think, where do I begin? I hope that I've given you some kind of starting point. And it's once you sort of get to grips with these principles of grouping things together, bringing things together that go pattern match, things like that. If you're starting with a paper collection as I have here that goes together anyway, it makes the job so much easier. I've just mixed and matched my inks and stamps to go with the papers that I already had. Great way to use up all those lovely scraps. I never throw any graphic 45 away, and you can see how tiny the pieces are here that you can use. But I also wanted to show you that you can use the same technique, exactly the same layout, and achieve another look altogether just by changing the colours that you use. So chances are that if you give this a go, you're going to come up with a different look like this one. Basically the same. It's like starting with a sketch, following a recipe, but I've changed my papers and the colours. I think this is a bit more of a feminine look. I've used some flower brads. I could easily have used some paper flowers if I wanted to, and I hope that I've showed you that this technique is really versatile, fun to do, quite quick, which is always great in a busy scrapbooker's life. So I hope that you give it a go. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, the share button, and I look forward to sharing some more videos with you very soon. So finishing off with another look at my graphic 45 layout today, and I hope that you've enjoyed the video, and I look forward to your company again very soon. Thank you for watching. So the first link that I'm sharing is back to my blog, where you can look down the sidebar and you'll find a list of labels. You could look under scrapbooking if you want to look at layouts in particular, or you could look under a paper collection like Graphic 45, which is this one here, and you could look at other layouts that I've made using those paper collections. Alternatively, you could click on this link and you can see how I started with a single page layout and decided to use all my lovely graphic 45 again scraps and create all these little pocket pieces for a Project Life style page. So this is the video if you want to see how I did that. And then last but not least, a link back to my Etsy shop where I share, or I sell, should I say, workshops to show you how to make projects like these. I made this one down at Cornwall with the lovely Margaret in Scrapbook Magic, and her and her ladies had fun with the couture collection, and look what happens when you open up the pyramid. Great project, and I hope that you visit my Etsy shop to check that out.